Why, hello there, I'm Professor Joel and welcome to another episode of Planet Scooby Reviews. Today we are covering Nowhere to Hide, which is the first episode of the second season of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And it originally aired on September 12th, 1970. This is the first episode to ever introduce us to the chase scene song sequence, and in this episode we get the tune Recipe for My Love performed by George A. Robertson Jr. We also get a new opening credit scene and closing credit scene with new clips from this season, along with a different singer singing the theme song. So we get George A. Robertson Jr. again singing the theme song, replacing Larry Marks, who sang it in Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Season 1. Heather North also joins the cast as Daphne, replacing the former voice actress. The plot of this episode sees the gang encountering the ghost of Mr. Hyde and has several twists and turns, kicking off season 2 with a pretty big bang, I'd say. So this episode was recommended or requested by two people. The first one being Victor, who requested it way back in probably November. And then Tina also requested this, who is a big fan of classic literature and loved how this episode had the ghost of Mr. Hyde in it. But enough of my jibber jabber, let's get to the review. The episode begins with a mysterious man in a bucket hat robbing a jewelry store in a high-rise building. There he climbs the building and he steals a rare necklace before climbing back down to the ground. It's almost as if he wants to be seen as he lets out a sinister laugh, allowing a security guard to call for backup.
The ghost of Hyde!
In order to evade the police, the ghost of Mr. Hyde runs past the malt shop and slips into the back of the mystery machine. Inside the malt shop, the gang are enjoying some ice cream sundaes after a fun night at a magic show held at their high school. When it's time to head home, they climb into the mystery machine and are completely oblivious to their unwanted guest who is hiding under a beach blanket. Shaggy is excited to get home and watch I Was a Teenage Blob, which Velma calls corny. She felt the way that the blob hid in the back seat of the teenagers' cars for his victims was unrealistic.
The blob would hide in the back of cars and wait for his victims.
Daphne and Shaggy have the chills, and Freddy explains that the Mr. Machine's heater is broken. Velma asks for Scooby to fetch the beach blanket, and Scooby gets a close-up look at Mr. Hyde. Scooby tosses the beach blanket back onto the ghost and tells the gang, who naturally don't believe him. Mr. Hyde stands up, and Freddy stops the Mystery Machine so they all can run out. Hiding behind a rotting log, they watch as Mr. Hyde runs into the evening mist. Velma recognizes him as the ghost of Mr. Hyde.
That's the ghost of Mr. Hyde!
The creepy jewel thief who has been scaring everyone in town. The gang decide to follow Mr. Hyde and watch him go inside a spooky-looking house. The gang plan on slipping into the back door of the house unnoticed. However, upon opening it, a trapdoor underneath opens up and drops them into a basement room. The room turns out to be a science laboratory where they meet Dr. Jekyll. Relieved he's not Mr. Hyde, the gang are happy to see him. However, Dr. Jekyll explains that he fears he might have turned into the sinister ghost like his grandfather did before him. A week prior, Dr. Jekyll had been testing out a new vitamin formula that you only have to take once in your life. Something went wrong and he passed out.
I've been working on a new vitamin formula that you only have to take once in your life.
Yabba dabba doo! Yabba dabba doo!
Yabba dabba doo, yabba dabba doo.
Flintstones vitamins are good to chew.
Yabba dabba doo, they're
Good to chew. Yabba dabba doo!
When he regained consciousness, his housekeeper, Helga, reawakened him, and Dr. Jekyll had noticed that his feet were covered in mud from being out in the marsh. The same very thing had just happened tonight, but this time he found the jewels that Mr. Hyde had stolen in his pocket. Velma notices that the mud on Dr. Jekyll's boots are dry, meaning he couldn't have just come in from the swamp. As this is incredibly strange, Freddy decides to split up and search the mansion for clues. Up in the attic, Scooby and Shaggy find a chest full of costumes and masks. The two think the ghost of Mr. Hyde is up in the attic with them, but it turns out to be a stern Helga. The maid is furious with Scooby and Shaggy for messing up the attic, which she had recently cleaned. Her cleaning skills are rather questionable as the attic is full of dust and spiderwebs. In the living room, Freddy has found an old newspaper clipping half burnt in the fireplace. The article is about Helga the Great, a famous trapeze artist who can scale high buildings as the human fly. Velma finds it fishy that a former circus star is in the backwood swamps working as a housekeeper. In the library, Shaggy pulls out a book called 101 Ghosts and Ghouls off the shelf. In its place, the head of Mr. Hyde emerges and laughs his evil laugh. A small but comical chase scene occurs and Scooby and Shaggy end up sliding down a stair railing and crashing into Velma. From there, they end up sliding down a laundry chute and into the basement. Here they find another clue, a feather duster, just like the one Helga was using to dust the attic. The feather duster is sitting on top of some muddy shoes where the mud is a little more wet than the mud we saw on the doctor's shoes earlier. Suspicious, Velma decides to head up to Helga's room and search for more clues. The entire gang are now in Helga's room and find a bottle of knockout drops and a can of glow-in-the-dark paint underneath her mattress. In a fruit bowl outside, Shaggy yells out that he's found another clue, but he is snatched away by Mr. Hyde before he can reveal what he's found. Tied up in the basement, the ghost of Mr. Hyde is formulating a concoction to turn Shaggy into a frog. Scooby rushes into the lab to rescue Shaggy, and we get our classic chase scene set to the song Recipe for My Love. When the chase is over, Shaggy reveals that he had found 4 suction cups in a fruit bowl. Convinced the villain is Helga, the gang create their own trap using similar costumes and masks that Mr. Hyde is wearing. The trap works and they catch Mr. Hyde in an old mattress. Daphne unmasks Mr. Hyde and it turns out to be Dr. Jekyll.
It should be Helga, the housemaid. Dr. Jekyll?
Calling in the sheriff, the plot is revealed that Dr. Jekyll turned to a life of crime as all his experiments had failed.
Shame on you, Dr. Jekyll.
In his latest swindle, he had not expected the gang to follow him through the swamp. With some quick thinking, he decided to frame Helga with his fake clues. The plan almost worked, except the suction cups would have eventually gave him away. Since Helga was an ex-circus star, she never would have needed them. So I give this episode an 8.5 out of 10 because it has a creepy looking villain in Mr. Hyde, even though he's a bit generic looking. He's not the most memorable Scooby villain, I'd say, but he looks cool. And we also get a spooky house filled with traps, and it's got a science lab and a dusty attic and a library, so it's pretty cool. However, I found the episode a little rough in spots, and I think it had to do with all the twists and turns they took. Like, they really wanted to fool us, the viewer, but they forgot, in my opinion, to include some good scenes with Daphne and Freddy in particular, and Velma for the most part. Velma does get to shine a little more than Daphne and Freddy, but Daphne and Freddy are kind of in the, the back scenes of this episode more than normal, and that kind of made the episode lacking for me. However, there are fantastic scenes in this episode. My favorite being the trap scene where the gang, Freddy, Daphne, and Velma, they dress up like Mr. Hyde. I remember seeing this as a kid and just being terrified as Dr. Jekyll was, like just being as scared as he was in this chase scene or this trap scene. So I thought that was really cool. And the trap plays out more for laughs, I'd say. But for me as a kid, it was rather chilling because Velma's in that costume and, she's tiny and that costume's just kind of like loose and baggy on her. It makes her look really creepy. Same with Daphne. She's got a slim build and she just kind of looks, funny wearing this oversized costume. So I thought that was really cool. The opening scene where Mr. Hyde robs the jewelry store and then having Mr. Hyde slip into the mystery machine and watching that pay off, that was really cool, especially as Velma's like discussing, the scene from the movie where the exact same thing was happening. That parallel was really cool. And the way Mr. Hyde grabbed Shaggy, that was kind of freaky. And where he brought him down the basement and strapped him down and was threatening to turn him into a frog, that was really cool. Even though, he had Shaggy tied up, I don't know why he just didn't get the suction cups from him then. That was, whatever. And then we have the library scene where Mr. Hyde's face pokes out when Shaggy pulls that book out. That was fantastic as well. So while Mr. Hyde is creepy and I do like the design, I just wish they had more fun with the design maybe. I guess they're kind of going with the classic portrayal of Mr. Hyde, of how he might have appeared when the book Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was written, with the bucket hat, which was maybe in style back then, and the trench coat. But he's just not as memorable as I want him to be. Even though I did remember him once I saw him, I just didn't find him as memorable as the Space Kook or, some of those classic Scooby-Doo villains that we see as Funko Pops and such. And finally, it's my common complaint. You'll hear this a few times from me. I just don't know why everything has to be the ghost of. Like, again, we have the ghost of Mr. Hyde. Why couldn't this generation of Dr. Jekyll be his own Mr. Hyde? I don't know. Maybe they do that to keep it kid-friendly because they want, I don't know why. Or where the logic would be to be kid-friendly. I guess maybe if you keep it as the ghost of, it's not grounded in reality versus like a Mr. Hyde really running around in the world, that could scare kids. I don't know. Or maybe they just did it to avoid lawsuits. Overall, yeah, I'd say this is above average episode and had some nice twists, which I enjoyed. I liked how they were doing these twists. I just, again, wish there's more Daphne, Freddy, and Velma. So once again, I want to thank everyone for their likes, subscribes, views, etc., etc. I appreciate hearing from everyone every week. It's great and it's fantastic. We're now in May, and I think come June, July, August, the summer, I will be on hiatus and returning in September. So we'll probably have about 3 more episodes, and then I'll just be taking a break. You know, being trapped inside during this pandemic, I'm looking forward to some warm weather, and I'm sure you are too. And I got a nice garden that I want to grow, and I just want to be outside and spend more time with my family who are complaining I'm behind the computer too much. So that is where my channel's going in the near future. Just those 3 months of hiatus. I'll still be taking requests. I'll still be doing weekly reviews on my website. And again, the videos will resume in September come the end of May. So until next time, when we are going to do the Spirits of 76, stay spooky.
Yeah.